Welcome to Regenerate, the show about the regenerative economy. We don't have that many rules on this show, but if there is one, we believe that in 2020 in particular, the economy needs to be reimagined, reinvented, reborn, in a word, regenerated. And that regeneration begins with the soil. And that has been the source, if you like, of the conversation in our series with agriculturalists, with economists, with business theorists, with philosophers. And today we have, I think, a philosopher, a business theorist, an agriculturalist, a new thinker all in one. Otto Scharmer is a professor at Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Boston. He's talking to me from his home in Arlington, in Massachusetts. He's German-born. He's very much in the tradition of the European intellectual coming to America and getting Americans to rethink the nature of the world. I was particularly struck by a piece that Otto published on Medium a couple of months ago, focusing on what he calls our blind spots. Otto has argued that we have in 2020 three collective blind spots: the soil, democracy, and consciousness. Now, perhaps at Regenerate, we would put the soil in the middle of that graphic, but I'm not going to argue with Otto on the organization of his three collective blind spots. Otto, welcome to Regenerate.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for having me on.
So to begin, Otto, what exactly is a blind spot? You have this wonderful visual in your Medium piece of what blind spots are. So this is not just a throwaway term. You've obviously given the notion of a blind spot some deep thinking.
Well, a blind spot basically is what we take for granted if it is not, right? So a blind spot can be like our habitual way of seeing things as one way, when in reality they also could be another way. And I think particularly in 2020, it has been said many times, we live in a moment of disruption. It's particularly a collective and global experience. It has been this year. And what we can notice is then that whenever disruption happens, right? So what does disruption really mean? Generally, it means the future is going to be different from the past. So something is changing. So whenever disruption happens, there are two different ways how I can respond. One is turning away, and the other one is turning toward. And turning away is basically a freeze reaction of the human mind, right? Closing the mind, closing the heart, closing the will, aka ignorance, hate, and fear. So from the phrase, "Make America Great Again," the most important word is the last word, right? Again, because it means we are orienting ourselves back in time, kind of back to a time that has already passed. So that's one way of responding, and it's like not necessarily like evil intention or something, but it is an intention that it is a reaction that is based on a freeze reaction, maybe a self-protection of the mind, because what's coming our way is too much. The other way of responding to disruption is turning toward. Turning toward, we leaning into an emerging future that we don't even know what it really is. And the only way of doing it is by opening the mind, aka curiosity, opening the heart, aka empathy, compassion, and opening the will, which is the capacity of courage. So in that way, you can say, in a moment when we have this conversation where we all have the hope that we are at the tail end, not only of the period of Trump, but also the period of Trumpism, that the deepest capacity that we have to develop to really move not only beyond Trump, but also beyond Trumpism, is the capacity to cultivate our resources of curiosity, compassion, and courage, because it is the foundation of responding to disruption in a way that is not going back to a time, that's not based on turning away and freezing, but it's based on leaning into an emerging future possibility that we need to embrace, and that requires us to let go and let come. And let go of what? Let go of everything that isn't essential, and also let go of the past. And letting come really means kind of connecting with emerging future possibilities that we really feel some resonance with.
Yeah, you have this, and I'm putting this up on the screen now, 3 words that are really important for you in terms of coming to terms with the future and the past are reckoning, reconciliation, and reparations. The 3 R's, Otto. Are those central in making sense of the solutions to the problems that now engulf us?
Absolutely. And I think they relate kind of on the other side of the slides that you just showed. You have the term of when you look at the left-hand side, the 3 blind spots, right? Blind spot 1 is denial, not seeing. Blind spot 2 is not feeling, it's desensing, right? So I see something, but I don't feel it. And blind spot 3 is apathy, right? It's not acting. And when I look at my own experience, for example, and the Black Lives Matter moment here in the United States, the first blind spot, the not seeing, really is about the continuity, the unbroken continuity from slave patrols over lynching to police brutality today. An example of the second blind spot, not feeling, is structural violence. Of course, I was aware of, the disproportionate suffering that, for example, the COVID situation created among the communities of color and so on. So I'm aware of that in my mind, but did I really feel it? And I think more often than not, I think the true answer is I didn't really feel it. And it only really fully opened up when seeing the unspeakable 8 minutes and 46 seconds, the killing of George Floyd.
So, Otto, let's go back to your 3 collective blind spots. You've talked a little bit about democracy, although I do want to come back to that. You've touched on consciousness, but we haven't talked yet about our central subject at Regenerate, the soil. How does the soil fit into this trinity of crises confronting us in 2020?
Well, the soil is, so the current crisis is really a crisis with 3 phases. It's kind of the environmental, and I would say the ecological crisis is really a crisis with 3 phases. The environmental crisis, the social economic crisis, and then a spiritual crisis, kind of that connects how we relate to our own deeper sources of knowing. And when you look at soil is really not only at the root of at the root of responding to the climate change situation. So we all know we need to keep fossil fuels, in the ground, right? So that's kind of one condition of responding to the climate change that we have. But the other condition is, and most people, we are making slow progress there, some progress, in fact, but not fast enough. But the other issue that is rarely talked about is we need to shift our agricultural model kind of from conventional to regenerative, because in terms of carbon sequestration and also in terms of emission today from the conventional agricultural model, that's probably the second biggest leverage point that we have. And it's not talked about at all in a way that would be sufficient, and that's why I think democracy is so important. If you talk to people today, even in countries here like the US, but certainly also in Europe and in other places, you give and you ask them, what would be your choice? Kind of, do you want an agricultural model, kind of that is poisoning the earth, the groundwater, and your own body? Or do you want an agricultural model that keeps regenerating the earth, regenerating you and your family, and it's also kind of good for the well-being of the ecosystem? So it's more kind of in line with the biodiversity challenge that we have. On average, about 70+%, right, vote for the first model. So to the degree that you ask people, they vote for that. Yet what we do with our public policies is that almost by $1 trillion a year, we are subsidizing the old model.
Yeah, and I've really been struck with your focus in this in your written work, Otto. Your arguments are compelling and troubling. You suggest that, and it's not just your work. You cite a lot of research. Between 43 and 57% of human-caused greenhouse gas emission comes from food and agricultural production. The UN Food and Agricultural Organization have warned we may only have 60 annual harvests left. And as you just said, we spend nearly $1 trillion a year subsidizing self-harming industrial agriculture, as with this picture of an industrial tractor. Is this a civilizational crisis, Otto?
I think it is. So let me just say kind of the first number, that was one study. There are other studies, for example, current UN numbers, they come out more at 30%, right. But basically, it ends up with the same conclusion, particularly if you consider the carbon sequestration capacities the moment you switch to regenerative agriculture. Yes, we are in a civilizational crisis, and I believe it comes with three main questions that we have to answer, and three main sectors of society that we have to reimagine and reshape. The first one is the economy, and that starts with agriculture. The second one is democracy, and that starts with making more relevant what the majority of people really want. That's applicable to many countries today, where the consciousness of the population of people actually is much more around environmental issues, is much more evolved than the decision making of political systems that are often organized by special interest groups, kind of and vested interests, kind of that are about fossil fuel or big agriculture or others. And the third one, I think, has to do with reimagine and reshape our learning infrastructures. And what really is, so we have like interesting things going on in all these places. But where I see, when you say civilizational crisis, right? So we are in a development where we see not only, we see many farms dying and people going to the cities where the opportunity is. And I think what the real challenge is not only switching to regenerative agriculture, but also using the current COVID challenge as an opportunity to rebalancing the relationship between urban areas and rural areas and agriculture by bringing, for example, key learning and key cultural opportunities kind of back into the villages, kind of back into rural places. And for example, by reinventing how we organize a university and higher ed in ways that makes role models of regenerative agriculture more a natural center kind of for developing this new culture and these new places for learning. And in fact, you can see many examples of that. So when you look at the new economy movement here in the United States, a lot of them start with agriculture, right? And then you process the food, so then come, restaurants and well-being kind of activities around that. So when I look at when you look from a civilizational perspective and you say, okay, in our area, there's one old civilization dying and something else is being born. Where are the seeds of the new civilization?
And you use the word seeds, Otto, and I'm sure as a metaphor, because of course, ultimately, all this comes back down to the soil. One of the things we're trying to do at Regenerate is establish some Regenerate retreats to take people back to the soil, back to the land. Actually, we'd love you to be involved when the economy gets back to normal. Is this an important thing to do, to take city people back to their roots? Is it a way of going back to the origins of humanity?
Well, for some people it's back. For some people it's the first time to really relating with Earth, right? Relating with Mother Earth in their own life, right?
When I say back, I mean in a
historical,
as a species sense,
yeah.
rather than personal.
No, I believe that the connection, the personalized connection that each and every one of us, through our daily consumption, through our food, with Earth, and with the ways, kind of, the mode in which kind of the food is being produced and generated and processed, is something where that is largely unaware for most people today. And the more awareness we bring into this relationship, which eventually is a relationship that I have to the land, that I have to the planet, and that I have also to agriculture, where this planet is cultivated according to one set of principles or another, I think that's really at the core of the current shift. And when I look around, kind of where are really the hotspots of kind of of a new economy and kind of a new thinking and of a new culture, often what you see is that it is around. So when people, for example, move out of urban areas, as many people do, particularly now, where do they go? They go close to regenerative farms, right? They go close to areas where you have a regenerative farm. Maybe you have a good school nearby. And that's really kind of, we all have the same criteria. And that's why you see many clusters. So you see kind of the seeds of the new civilization being developed often in ecosystems that are surrounding regenerative farms. And I think that's something really interesting. It begs the question, how can we link what's the regenerative agricultural part of the farm also with kind of deeper learning places, as you just mentioned, kind of creating retreats, kind of creating the ecosystem on a farm, which is also, it's not only about food, but it's about a living ecosystem where we can experience a certain presence of nature that allows us to connect to our own deeper sources of being, of who we really are, and the story of the future that we want to be part of. So it's kind of this new community building that we often see happening in and also around regenerative farms. And that's why I think the new wave of regenerative farms that we see coming into being right now, there are important core seeds or crystals kind of a new civilizational movement that is about what you said in the opening, right? It's about regenerating, but I would add regenerating not only our economy, but also regenerating kind of our democracy, which essentially kind of is based on dialogue. It's based on kind of how we make sense together, right, as a community, and how we reach kind of at consensus around some shared deeper issues, and how we reimagine and how reshape our deeper learning infrastructures. And again, with the digital technology, we have now the possibility to use regenerative farms through kind of more distributed modes of and multi-local modes of learning and organizing. We could turn farms into a new type of university that is focused on bringing this new civilization kind of more in harmony, really focusing on not only bridging, but transforming the three big divides of our time, the ecological, the social, and the spiritual divide, to really develop new approaches and a new economic thinking, and new kind of advancing our democracies, and new learning infrastructures that will make a difference on these issues. And when I don't know, Andrew, about your experience, but when I go around, I talk to people in different places, almost everyone you talk to these days agrees on the following three things. One, our old civilization is moving in the wrong direction, and we are about to hit the wall. In fact, 2020 is the year where this hitting the wall becomes more visible than ever before. Two, personally, I want to be part of a different story, right? Even though I participate in the old story. And number three, I don't know how. That's the basic condition many people live in today. And I think that's where we need to work together in new ways, and we need to link the reinvention of farming on this planet with also the reinvention of our economy and the reinvention of learning.
Yeah, I think your idea of turning regenerative farms into universities or colleges or places for rethinking our relationship with the world and each other is really profound. I love the idea. We've had, as you know, Joel Salatin on the show, Isabella Tree, many other leading regenerative farmers, and I think they would be ideal leaders. I'm also struck, Otto, by your focus in your work on citizen assemblies. I made a film last year about fixing democracy, and we had a section on citizen assemblies. I could imagine these citizen assemblies perhaps sometimes sitting quite literally on farms in the soil. What in your mind is so important about citizen assemblies in terms of fixing this third blind spot of democracy?
Yeah, so we know when you look at the climate situation, when you look at the biodiversity situation, and when you look at the even like conventional things like the SDGs, everyone knows the changes that are necessary now will be profound. We need profound transformation.
And I'm showing this. There's no planet B, right, Otto?
Exactly.
As these young women are reminding us.
No planet B, and no one wants like any kind of green or otherwise dictatorship. So the only way of doing that in a democratic form is to advance democracy, kind of make kind of the democratic conversation and democratic decision making more relevant how we run our democracies. Democracy in the West is in a profound crisis, right? It is on the ballot this year here in the United States, but it's also at risk in many other places. And when you look at where are really interesting developments that make democracy more direct, more dialogic, and also more distributed, kind of bringing in the voices kind of the people who are actually affected by certain decision making, what you see is that citizen councils is one of the really interesting developments that happens in a variety of countries, particularly in Europe, but also in Asia, for example, in Taiwan. And what we have seen there is and it's really a mechanism of bringing common sense back into the political process. And it's a mechanism of freeing the political decision-making process from the influence of special interest groups, right? That basically buy kind of through their campaign contributions, the decision-making.
The people who pay for these sorts of things.
Exactly. So that's why $1 trillion of subsidies goes in the wrong direction today. And so we have seen particularly interesting examples when you have citizen councils it doesn't just mean like kind of bringing in, so they are randomly selected. There is a capacity building kind of that, and there's kind of all sorts of expert knowledge available to them. But their job really is to contemplate these issues with a mindset of, really taking into account the well-being of the whole. On average, these councils come up with much more radical proposals than the established parliaments. And then, of course, you can't just, implement it from there. But if those proposals are put to a referendum, I think you have a very powerful way. And of course, bring also in the voice of the parliament. You have a very powerful way of advancing the democratic process by making it not less democratic, but more democratic. And a great example, a mini example of, a version how elements of direct democracy can actually accelerate the ecological transformation is in southern Germany, in Bavaria, kind of where an initiative started a referendum type of process that within a year kind of forced a profound shift from supporting conventional agriculture based on monoculture and so forth, to a much more, to a framework really that is based on biodiversity and regenerative agriculture principles for a significant portion of the agricultural land. So that's the heartland of the German industry. It's the most conservative state in Germany. And that's what they did. So I think to the degree that we make people's voice more relevant in the political process, we'll be able to advance and accelerate the transformation that we all need to see in this decade.
Otto, as I said earlier, and as you stressed, your work focuses on moving forward rather than backwards, but you do see the importance of history. And I wonder whether it's any coincidence that these citizen assemblies are very much built around the democracies of antiquity and their lottery system for citizen engagement. That doesn't mean we support those systems entirely, given that they excluded slaves and women. But do you think to move forward, we have to look backwards? So just as in politics, to move forward, we have to look back to antiquity. And when it comes to agriculture and food and our own health, we do need to move forward, but we also need to go backwards and remind ourselves of the importance of the earth.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, and when I talked, you're right about the roots of democracy, kind of, which is really rooted in dialogue and in conversation. It's also true for the root of our learning system, because that's kind of the Academy of Athens is the true source kind of Western education. And how did that start? In the growth and in dialogue. There was no separation between students and teachers. There was only joint inquiry kind of into topics. So the Academy of Athens. And yes, these places excluded too many people. So that's what we need to change. And for example, when you talk with and work with indigenous groups today, what they will tell you is kind of the regenerative model. That's what we have been doing all the time. So there's kind of, again, another source of relating to Mother Nature, relating to soil, relating to the land, to earth, in a way that, has been practiced once in the past, but is in most places today destroyed by an overlay kind of let's say, kind of Western civilization, the conventional economic model. So moving forward means taking an inspiration kind of from those origins and bringing it into reality today in a much more conscious way, because it needs to be more conscious, because we are at the risk of destroying already what we have. So we need to, bring these principles into reality on a much larger level of scale also than, what used to be there in the past. And going back to these sources that you cited, including kind of the indigenous sources here in the United States, that has been a very important source for our Constitution. And, if we want to rethink the economy, I think there's a lot we can learn from these places and these cultures.
A previous guest on the show, Rianne Eisler, I don't know if you're familiar with her work, but she is a humanist like you and also an anthropologist, and a lot of her work focuses on indigenous tribes and their ways of building community. I wonder if the seeds of this social regeneration lies in the climate movement today. These young people are now going out on the streets and working outside traditional institutions. Do you think that the environmental movement, particularly the one driven by young people, is this the core seed now of fixing our three blind spots, Otto?
It is one core seed, I would say. It is not the only one. And I don't think it is responsible if people from our generation just dump everything on the next one, right? Oh, that's what we failed, and now it's over to you. That's not going to work. It's also interesting, I think, in that movement that it's a little bit different than like 50 years ago. So it's not against the elder generation, but it's like holding up the mirror and say, hey, so why are you not living up to your own responsibility? So I think kind of this is much more a cross-generational alliance, what's necessary right now. It has been a huge and wonderful spark, kind of the Fridays for Future, the climate movement. I think it has taken a little bit like a backseat over the past few months. But if COVID has taught us anything, it is this. The moment we as a global species put our mind on a problem together, we can bend the curve. We are the only species on Earth who can do that. So we can collectively focus on the outcomes that we collectively create, and we can, by putting our attention on the collective behavior that we enact moment to moment, we can bend the curve. We can change the rules according to which behavior operates.
It's the MLK quote that you put in your wonderful graphic on the blind spot. The arc of moral justice is long, but it bends towards justice. And you, I'm assuming, Otto, really believe that.
I believe that, and I think we have seen that. So that in those countries and those communities where we are able to do this together, we are able to bend the curve. Now, our challenge is, A, it hasn't happened in all places, and B, we need to really focus on the biggest challenges that are coming our way in this decade, and that is kind of the climate challenge that is has to do with biodiversity, and it has to do with climate justice, because you cannot address any of these challenges if we do not address them from a lens of social justice and, in the view of the shocking levels of inequality that have been amplified over the past 4 decades. And none of the above can be made if we are not shifting our consciousness from what I call an ecosystem awareness to an ecosystem awareness. You could say from a silo view to a systems view that really takes into account all the different perspectives on a system, particularly the ones that today are the most marginalized. So that shift from ego to eco, I think, is really at the core of moving towards climate justice. And the farms of the future, I think, kind of are really the places where we cultivate the seeds of this shift, of this civilizational shift, not only by talking about it, but by creating communities that operate according to these new principles.
The farms of the future, I think you're suggesting, are universities and churches and factories all in one. Finally, Otto, you've done a wonderful job joining all these dots, making it clear that the relationship between factory farming and the environmental crisis and our political crisis and our personal crisis, they're all bound up. I'm going to let you dream at the end because you are ultimately, I suspect, a dreamer. Let's say we fix our three collective blind spots in the next 10 or 20 years. You've written in your work about the year 2040 as a moment when things can get better. What will the world look like if these three collective blind spots of soil, democracy, and consciousness they're never going to be fixed because there's always going to be new problems. We're never going to get to the end of history. We've made that mistake before. But what will the world look like in 2040 if at least these blind spots have been improved, if we're addressing them collectively?
Well, I think that the first thing we need to remember is when you look at the last century, right? So the darkest hour, which was 1941, Hitler at the height of his power, gave birth to what ever since has been the global multilateral environment. It was conceived in the darkest hour. If you go back into the history of the United States, kind of the major shifts, kind of the basically transforming the institution of slavery, right, to the degree that we could, happened kind of during the Civil War. So we are in another dark hour, in another moment like that. But that means all the possibilities are also here. So where the danger is, the saving power also grows. I mean, we should never forget that. So I really appreciate your question. My experience of the current moment is this. I have seen massive change in my life several times. One of them was 1989. I was member of the peace movement, of the green movement earlier. So part of the movement, both in Western Europe and Germany, and also in Eastern Europe and Germany, that brought down the wall in 1989. And yet, what happened back then was the collapse of a separation between two social systems, socialism, capitalism, right? What we see today is the collapse of a different kind of wall. It's not a wall between system A, system B, but it's a collapse of a wall between self and system, between how I connect with others and how I connect with the whole system, both on the level of the mind, but also how I feel or not feel kind of the pain of others kind of in my own ecosystem, in my own community. So my dream, I think that's the collapse of the wall today. And that's our current moment. We have the possibility in this dark hour we are in to really reimagine and reshape where we are going on a collective level in terms of the ecological divide, the social divide, but also the deeper spiritual divide, which is the disconnect between who I am today, who I could be tomorrow. So 2040, 2050, I think could be a time where this potential, where we could see a thriving ecosystem of I agree with you, not all problems will be solved, but what I think it's quite possible, just as people in 1941 imagined the post-war system, we can use this moment to imagine another civilization that is based on bridging the ecological divide, the social economic divide, and also kind of the spiritual divide. And we see vibrant and global ecosystem of vibrant communities that operate according to these principles. And we will see countries and regions that more and more will align with that. An example of that, frankly, is the Scandinavian countries, the Nordic model, which when you historically double click on that, and why is it that in all the well-being matrix, the 5 Scandinavian countries are always ranking at the top. So why is that? And the answer is, it is because of an educational intervention, right, with the Danish folk high school that created the soil, if you want. It was for farmers back then, right? High quality education for farmers and for everyone. So not only for the elites in the countries, that created the condition for growth in terms of the economy, but also human growth, and both, and growth in terms of the community and the political process, which until today is the foundation for the Nordic model. So I think that's called for today in a new way by also using technologies. But I very much agree with you, in your other writings, kind of your criticism of technology. It's often, I mean, it is, as we know from the Social Dilemma movie and so on, it is often kind of one of the forces that is reinforcing kind of the spiritual divide, kind of the problems that we have to truly connect to our deeper sources of creativity, not only individually, but also on a collective level. So I think you see the seeds for all of these things today, but we need to focus them. And the farms of the future, kind of the regenerative farming movement, could be one of these hotspots, some of these hubs where these new ecosystems that will be place-based can organize around and can be connected with each other.